to reinvent the job of books. So this is going to change dramatically the way that you can do and deliver knowledge in this knowledge society. And so on and so on. So you know about SOA, distributed cloud services and so on, how complex it is on the back end, but also how powerful it can be on the front end. And just to say where we are playing as a company, we are here. So we are enabling the content management and the repositories behind the Moodles, WebCT, Blackboard, Sakai's in order to make this work seamlessly in federations and multiple LMSs for delivery. And now with Exact Mobile, again, mobile, you could do it siloed, standalone, and do very fancy things. I think, if to any event or to any workshop you go, you see more and more fancy and nice things on the media. But if this is another isolated system here, and it doesn't interwork with the ecosystem, so it doesn't talk to your existing platform in your online educational university, it doesn't talk with your school information system, it doesn't talk with your records tracking, it's going to be useless. In 2 years' time, we'll just throw it away, because it needs to be tied into the infrastructure. And that's the perspective that we come, so that our systems talk to Moodle, talk to Blackboard, talk to the repository on the back end. Now, let's come to content publishing. Now, content is king, and it will be even more king in all these evolutions. But we need new business models. If we see the business models, this is a very nice slide from a guy that I suggest to read. It's Tomita. He's an analyst, a Japanese analyst of media, and he was working across the 80s, so in very early days, before the internet. When he studied the market, he recognized the three main markets. And he's got on the axis here how many people you can reach, and over here the time that it takes you to reach them. So in the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to reach a lot of people, you either have to make it a time constrained or unconstrained process. So if you want to reach people in a real time, you need to have things like the CNN, a broadcast channel, and so on. If you're not concerned by time, you could write books, you could write newsletters, you could write journals. Then you had the advent of mass communication and broadcast. So the last 50 years have been affected by broadcast. Why did broadcast come to the market? Because if you wanted to do a very good message, so a nice TV show or a nice film, you had to have your return of investment on a lot of people. So it was a mass communication process. You need to know, how many people are out there, do an average, and it's a psychological, since we are here, average, or communicational average, and you should do the film for them. There was no way to personalize, because to do a nice film, you had to have a lot of people go into the cinema show and buy the ticket. The same thing with television, or with media moguls like Murdoch or Berlusconi. I mean, they had to buy everything, because if they didn't have newspaper, journals, and televisions, they couldn't return the investment of doing good stuff. Now, good stuff is Big Brother. You wouldn't agree with that, but because you are not maybe the target audience. But millions of people are looking at Big Brother, and for doing Big Brother, you have to have millions of investments upfront, and owning the template and format of Big Brother is a big business, rather than the Italian, English, or French, or Spanish version. So this is the other business models which have hugely affected communication and publishing and content over the last hundreds of years. Now, what Tomita went to the conclusion is that there was still one big market that you see it there, it's white, untapped by those media. There was no solution for content personalization. You couldn't do good content for few people because you couldn't afford it. There was no media out there which was enable you to do a nice video for 15 people. Or you couldn't do a nice books for hundreds of people. And if those people maybe were thousands but around the globe, you couldn't reach them with the distribution channel. So there was a big gap. Now, I think you all start understanding that that gap has now been solved. And it's been solved by two revolutions which have happened more or less in 3 or 4 years. Personal media. I mean, in 3 or 4 years, a media which can reach you wherever you are, understand where you are and who you are, and give you rich media content is now available. And the second big thing is social networking. So not only you can reach people, but the community of people doesn't need to be physically present in the cinema show or on the broadcast network. It can be anywhere. And it also has new phenomenon like viral casting, social casting, which means that if you give the good content to the right guy, his community will automatically adopt that content. That is a Copernican revolution for publishing. And you can understand that people who have created millions in the former models, first as usually they just jumped on it because they had the money. They did it wrong, and then now they had a large reluctancy to go into this new media because, they were doing overwhelming returns on the other ones. Now they are getting back in, and now is the time where things will change dramatically, and we will presumably have a new market, which is interactive narrowcasting. I like this term more. It's also on Wikipedia, which means rather than broadcasting, now I need to understand exactly who you are, what you want, what you like, and in which community you are in. At that point, I've done. I just do the content for you and not for everybody. And that's a huge difference. It's mass individualization versus individual massification, which was active up to, it's actually still active today. I mean, Marduk and the others are doing much more money, are still doing money with the old model, but they are transiting to the new one. And you can check this out on Wikipedia as a term. So that's where business models are key. This is just a Docomo business model in Japan. It's very easy. I'm a telecom operator. I've got the contents back there, and I've got portals up there. What I do, we team together, again, SOA, web services, infrastructure, exchanging of data, all behind the scene. The user just gets personalized content, and we split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The same thing is doing iTunes. I mean, iTunes, you need to give him 30% if you want to put your contents there. And that's where, publishers are reluctant. Google is opening the Android marketplace, and that's where, a different marketplace is going maybe to do it better and succeed in the future. But you say, well, I'm not, a media mogul. I'm just a teacher, and I'm here to stay. Why should I consider this? Well, first of all, your business will change dramatically in the future, but also from a pedagogical level. I mean, isn't this very similar to what we used to have before scholastic education? I mean, I don't want to exaggerate here, but I mean, as broadcasting has made our mindset of what communication is over the last 50 years, scholastic education has made our mindset of what education is over the hundreds of years before. So we still think that teaching and presenting means coming here and talking to a more or less homogenic audience, but I'm not needing to know what you know, what you know, what you know, and I can't talk one-to-one. This is still our forma mentis where we're coming from. But this is going to change, and presumably it's going to go back to the past. I mean, what Socrates did, put people inside the square and start talking one-to-one and creating communities and then letting them go and doing some peer reviewing, some support, completely different pedagogical models. Now, obviously, to make this happen, you need to have the good message, not only the good media and the good pedagogy, but what you do must be as sexy as a Nintendo game. I mean, if you're to a 12 years old or 10 years old, you don't give something on these media which is as nice as the Mario Bros or others, you're not going to engage it. So that's where formats and templates become very interesting. And this is just a chart from very famous Novak and Gowing, which are pedagogists, psychologists of pedagogy, Canadians. They've mapped what is meaningful learning versus rote learning, and they've related to the level of freedom that you give to the kid. The more prescriptive they are and the more rote content you give to him, like multiplication tables, you can affect behavioral and prescriptive learning, but you can't do things like constructive, associative learning, and so on. So this is typical format that you use, like multiplication, lecture, school laboratory. So this is how you map it. The more you go up here, the more you have the joy of learning, like, research, new music or architecture. You leave them free to create, and you give them very good inputs. It's going to have a joy of education. Now, where is learning today, e-learning today? Well, first generation e-learning was down there, turn pages, SCORM tracking. That was good for banks, for compulsory training, because somebody had to physically go to the end of the book to get a certification, and it's still good for maybe qualification and assessment-based education. But that is not enough related to video games, and that's why people started to do their own things while the technology was evolving. So while the media was getting richer and more capable, people were filling in the gap by doing their grassroots contents. They are doing their own contents and they're exchanging them. But again, they are not publishers, they are not pedagogists, so they are not yet doing the best thing that you can do on that media. And since technology is faster than its uptake, we already have solutions up there which could make you do what we will see why we call personal ambient learning. Things like game-based learning, social learning, location-based, trial and errors, and so on, all things that I think were in the awards, but which are very niche yet. And that's where we need to have professionals, we need to have new art directors, new broadcasters, people which put the money of Hollywood into Hollywood-like implementations of offerings. And if it becomes edutainment and if it becomes awarding from a business perspective, they will do it very soon. And that's where you come back to what I said before. If you really want a knowledge society or a new type of society, like the Industrial Revolution was empowered by electricity and transferring the complexity of electricity. So we really had an Industrial Revolution only when it was easy to turn on the engine and turn on the light. With all the infrastructure and all the micropayments and all the chain of value behind solved transparently, automatically, the same thing will need to happen to have personal ambient learning, which means a huge complexity behind there, and that's where we are working, we must work on together. But then the kid or the lady is in front of the Leonardo painting and she just takes out our smartphone and everything is automatic. Profiling, contextualization, location detection, portfolio detection, harvesting of content, packaging and sequencing automatically, and just rendering it. And that's not easy. But we've done it in Mobile Learn, we've done it in IRMOS, we've done it in a lot of research projects. Now it's the time to do it on a sustainable, cheaper, cloud-based environment which is getting out there. And obviously art and edutainment is one market which will get there a little bit later, but where you see it really effective today is industrial maintenance, just-in-time health support, medical education. These really need new solutions and new technologies, and they're ready to pay for them. So what will change, presumably, is the jobs of book. And we needed to have a trigger for all of this. So, it was a continuum. Technology is usually going to a continuum, and then they leapfrog forward to the next generation. And up to, I would say, 2 years ago, it was just dreams. We were all researchers, we were all excited about this, but it was quite crap. I mean, again, I'm not saying one better than the other, but Windows smartphones didn't work. The Blackboard were not interoperable. Our content management was more a research than a real thing, and so on and so on. So it was still in the research labs. Now, with the advent of the iPad, we had a boost acceleration, and these things are really revolutionizing the way, like a new commandment coming out there. And this is dramatically needed. I mean, this is a very nice free report that you can find on the internet. It was commissioned before the Obama election by both the Senate and the Congress in the U.S. for studying the textbook marketplace in the U.S. And it's very evocatory, called Turn the Page, and it's obviously a message to the publishers. You just turn the page on the internet and you find it. This is how books are distributed in schools and universities today in the U.S. Up to yesterday, more than 1.5 billion paper books are posted with tracks and postal systems, so physical objects, and more than 1 billion are returned unsold. This is due to the fact that the business model of publishing was invented in the Wall Street crisis, but not the last one, the 26th one, to help publishers. They let them go by distributing books and retired them if unsold, because they needed to have better balance sheets and so on. So what they put on the balance sheet is the distribution, not the really sold ones. And if they don't sell them, they mark them off as stock in the following balance sheet. And on this, the big publishing industry has flourished, but today, in the ages of iTunes, this is nonsense. I mean, there are a lot of states now asking for new digital marketplaces. They're asking for something which will be able to exchange learning objects and resources, interoperate with third-party learning management systems, create textbooks and use them, and teachers can pick and choose the assets or the pages or paragraphs and build them and so on. This is happening in California State. It's happening in a lot of leading ecosystems out there. And obviously, publishers still think that they want to do it alone. So what's happening today is that every main publisher is doing is next Amazon of the future. So they're doing it end-to-end rather than horizontally. So they're not trying to do, a governmental-led marketplace with clear definition of structures and standards and everybody just feeds the raw assets. No, they're trying to do everything. So starting from the iPad down to the copyrighted materials, trying to doing it end-to-end. Sometimes they team together, like CourseMark. There are the 5 biggest American publishers together, but otherwise they are siloed alone. And that is a problem because, again, if I was a governmental stakeholder and if I'm consulting the Commission, we should have a European marketplace for educational resources, not provided by a single stakeholder. That is monopoly. So you need to act first. If you don't want the publisher or the service provider, if a government doesn't want a single player to manage the education of its citizens and its kids, which is its future, it must act and decide very first. This is a nice parallel. I don't know, who knows what the missile gap is? Well, when this is a Kennedy statement, when in the 60s, everybody was talking about new defense and aerospace technologies, but everybody was just sitting on the back of their ages of success, of the Second World War win and so on, and they were really not doing research, not investing in research. And then suddenly, a missile came through the sky and they saw it, and there's a very nice film about this, and the Americans really woke up and started to invest huge amounts of money in what has still been the biggest conquest, presumably, of the knowledge society in Western economies, which has been the conquer of the moon. So in a couple of 5 years, they managed from zero to get onto the moon by technology investment. And so Kennedy called to do this. He called it the missile gap. And everybody, from governmental, but even to research, to grants, to prizes, they were all about inventing the new missile, which could have competed with the Sputnik, which the Russians launched. But in those days, it was quite easy. There was just Russians and Americans. It was just one direction. So when they saw it from east coming over, they had the time to react, and it was an easy competition to some extent. But today, as I said, if you are a leading university in Spain, if you're a leading publisher in the Spanish-talking market, and you say, well, I've got a leadership in South America, and nobody will ever come and do that market because I'm there to stay, and so on, things are happening at the speed of light. So really an established monopoly or leader can easily be outdriven by somebody who invests and invests rapidly in the right direction. So this is where the political agenda is becoming very important. We're working a little bit with all of these systems, but for example, where we did it very easily has been in Saudi Arabia, because they wanted to do it, they put the money there, and with Harvest Road and Moodle and Blackboard and their own LMS, which is Usur, and with our consultants, we created an infrastructure with all the universities tied together, producing their own content, exchanging them, and it's not a monopoly because there are publishers, there are producers, there is everybody able to contribute and share the content. And typically it's a closed ecosystem, so they just wanted to do it, they did it. In California, where they started off 5 years ago, now there's a push, but it's still at the, let's say, piloting stage for doing that. So how long do we have just to see some cases? Okay, we are a research lab, so many of you maybe have visited our research labs, and I was joking before the start that a lot of people have been here not for visiting us, but just because it's a wonderful location. It's presumably Italy's best bay spot, therefore Europe's, therefore the world's. No, it's one of the nicest spots around there. We are in this abbey here, and we have 400 square meters of research labs where we do our research projects. And we started off in 2000, more or less, and this was the jokey picture that we used in Mobile Learn, which is still the world's largest mobile learning project, funded by the European Commission. We were leading it, And this was the picture that I projected in 2000, saying, well, more or less in 10 years from now, hopefully this will not be mobile learning. And that was really what you could do about mobile learning in 2000. But nobody, if I well recall, would have ever guessed that something like this would have come out in a decade. Absolutely. That has gone beyond any of our thoughts. We have worked a lot. We have developed a learning content management system, and that is our market product. So we have research for us is more qualitative. Then we have 90% of our turnover is on selling the technologies that we do, and we are a world-leading now learning content management system. But since 2010, we have launched another 5-year research program, and we are working on 3 main things. There's now a new TEL, which is coming out, Technology Enhanced Learning Call, and we are very open to obviously do it together with anybody who's got smart ideas on 3 areas. Media-based personalization, so understanding which mobile you have, which is the screen resolution, which is the media, which is the gadgets that it has, like GPS, rotation. I mean, nobody's using the rotation capability of the iPad in education, for example, and so on and so on. Psychology, we did a lot of eye tracking and eye gaze control in wearable training, where, you know, if you're a maintainer on a cockpit and you need to repair an airplane, understanding that you're gazing at a specific point of a computer-rated design and giving you all the overlayers on top of it is key. So things like that, yesterday we did them on a CyberNow wearable computing, $15,000. So it wasn't consumer-oriented. Today with the iPad and a camera, you could do that with a $200 or $300 solution with the same capability. The second thing is skills and competency-based personalization. So once I understood which device you have, which location you're in, which sensors you need for your education, who are you? What are your competencies? What are your skills? What are your gaps? Which language do you speak? What is your abilities and disabilities? So portfolio, identity management, and so on. And then, once I've understood all this, how can I harvest learning experience and contents, package them, and deliver them on request in a sustainable and compelling way? It's all about caching content, it's about distribution, streaming, and so on. So these are the 3 layers on which we are working. These are just some of the projects that we have been doing, and I think you would recognize Spanish, both names and organizations which have very successfully worked together with us. And we are also working a lot on digital marketplaces. Now, it's as I said, we always try to highlight that the complexity needs to be on the back end and the easiness on the front end. So this is a multi-layered demonstrator that we did with and for Open Knowledge Initiative at MIT. We had 10 repositories back here from Ariadne, but also to Merlot. I mean, do you know that in the US we have Merlot, we have Connection? Who knows Merlot and Connection? Who's using it actively in its learning programs? I mean, these are thousands of learning objects done at the state-of-the-art in terms of pedagogy and contents on any subject matter, obviously from K-12 to higher education, and they are free. They can be harvested, queried, retrieved, sequenced, which is what you do here using OSINT protocol or software query languages or Open Archive. You can then repackage them, you can cache them out there, push them to the periphery. Presumably you would have a cache here, which has taken the contents from these repositories in the US, and your students can download Wi-Fi on their iPads while they're hearing what I'm saying. This is today even not research to some extent. It's feasible. But you know, between what is not research and what is really usable, I think there's a lot of research, especially if we are in a psychology department. So these are things that we've done technologically, and we're now doing digital marketplaces for specific verticals, and that's what we are very active on real worlds and real initiatives. TRIO is Europe's largest vocational training initiative, which is using Moodle and our repository. Cal State, we did the first pilot implementation with more than 15 publishers. All the colleges, schools, and universities in California, which is the world's largest educational establishment. Now they've moved to an open source repository because it was fully interoperable, so they could take off one system and put the other because, you know, licensing and wires and so on. But doing it the right way means that you can mix and match wherever you want. You're not locked in. And this is where I always like to refer to. I mean, this is really working well in Saudi, but it's working well because not for technology's sake, but for political, governmental, and regulatory sake, where they did what they wanted. And doing it in the other ecosystem has been much more difficult. So how did we, let's step a little bit more deeper into mobile and then see some case studies with videos and so on. So as I said, it's really happening while we talk at the speed of light, and we'll see it that in a 24-hour clock, the days that we are living today are a couple of seconds near to midnight. So really, days and years in internet ages are decades or even more in the old days. Now, with the advent of the Book of Jobs, it really was a Copernican change of the things which were really exploitable from a sales perspective and a commercial perspective. We've all seen the press covered about all these parallels with Moses and the Ten Commandments, but it's undoubtful that the advantage of the iPad has been astonishing, and I think they've just rounded 20 million sales while we talk. So it's been I gave up updating the charts. I mean, these were, I think, just in April 2010 to show the skyrocketing sales, and now it's more than 20 millions. But if you see here, education is very low in terms of the applications, and you don't even have it in this chart. So 44% are still gains. So there's a huge space for an educational offering. And the reasons why you shouldn't go into these technologies is just because others are coming out. So maybe, but it's so cheap that maybe you should start investigating into one. We're also working, I mean, it's not a perfect device, so there's a lot of things to do behind it. Everything needs to be done behind it, because a huge problem is iTunes, and we'll see that later in my perspective. But also from a sensoristic point of view, it had huge limitations. And obviously with the iPad 2, they've solved it, a lot of things, but not in direction. The nice thing of iPad, of iPhone, or of Apple is that it does the thing not the way you would expect them to. Everybody was asking for this, smaller screen, and there were huge jokes about it on the internet, but they didn't change it. They just made it thinner, faster, and with the webcams. So that's been a quite interesting change from them. But the real cons are essentially two. Flash. So if you want to do rich media engagements, you need to have vectorized, you need to have HTML5. So there's a huge potential of doing the substitute of Flash, which has got huge problems, especially because Adobe is quite reluctant to retrocompatibility, and I mean they are doing things they don't have any.